The year was 2347, and humanity was dying. For 30 long years, the Galactic Empire had hunted humans across the stars. They burned colonies. They destroyed fleets. They killed billions without mercy or hesitation. The Empire was old, powerful beyond measure, and they had decided that humans were too dangerous to live. Captain Daniel Hayes sat alone in his quarters aboard the USS Defiant, staring at a photograph of Earth taken from orbit. The blue oceans, the green continents, the white clouds swirling across the surface. 8 billion people still lived down there, waiting for the end. The Imperial fleet was coming, and there was nothing left to stop them. The Defiant was the last warship humanity possessed. She was a Titan-class dreadnought, 3 kilometers of armored hull, and experimental weapons. Her crew numbered 400 men and women who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. They were all that stood between Earth and total extinction. Hayes was 52 years old. He had been fighting the Empire since he was 22, watching friends die, watching worlds burn, watching humanity pushed further and further toward oblivion. He was tired in ways that sleep could never fix. But he was not ready to give up. Not yet. Not while there was still one chance left. A knock came at his door. "Enter," Hayes said, setting down the photograph. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Monroe stepped inside. She was his tactical officer, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had served under Hayes for 8 years, and he trusted her completely. "The senior staff is assembled in the briefing room," Monroe said. "Dr. Webb says she's ready to present her findings." Hayes nodded and rose from his chair. "Then let's not keep them waiting." They walked together through the corridors of the Defiant. The ship hummed with quiet energy, her systems running smoothly despite decades of hard use. Crew members saluted as they passed, their faces showing a mixture of fear and determination. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone had made peace with it in their own way. The briefing room was located near the center of the ship. It's protected by multiple layers of armor and shielding. When Hayes entered, he found his senior officers already seated around the central table. Commander Frank Torres, his executive officer, sat to his right. Chief Engineer Samuel Price occupied the seat to his left, and at the head of the table, standing before a holographic display, was Dr. Catherine Webb. Webb was perhaps the most brilliant scientist humanity had ever produced. She had spent the last 5 years working on a project so secret that even Hayes had not known all the details until recently. Now, with extinction looming, she was ready to reveal everything. "Thank you all for coming," Webb began, her voice calm and measured. "I know we don't have much time, so I'll get straight to the point. I believe I have found a way to end this war. Not just slow the Empire down, not just buy Earth a few more months, but actually end it, permanently." The officers exchanged glances. Torres leaned forward, his weathered face showing cautious hope. "How?" he asked simply. Webb touched a control, and the holographic display changed to show a star map. At the center was a single point of light, larger and brighter than the rest. "This is Throne Prime," Webb explained, "the capital of the Galactic Empire. It sits at the heart of their territory, 40,000 light-years from Earth. The Emperor lives there. The Admiralty commands from there. The political leadership of 12 species is concentrated in that single system." "We know all this," Price said, his Scottish accent thickening with impatience. "We also know it's the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. 300 orbital platforms, 50,000 warships, and enough firepower to crack a planet in half." "Correct," Webb said, nodding. "A direct assault would be impossible. Even if we had 1,000 ships instead of 1, we couldn't break through those defenses. But I'm not proposing a direct assault." She changed the display again, this time showing the internal structure of a star. "For the past 5 years, I have been studying the fundamental nature of space and time. I discovered that our universe is not a single continuous fabric, but rather a series of dimensional layers stacked upon one another. My dimensional fold drive allows us to move between these layers, effectively teleporting from one point in space to another instantly." Hayes had heard this much before. You're proposing we fold directly to Throne Prime, he said. Bypass their outer defenses entirely. More than that, Webb said, and her eyes gleamed with something that might have been excitement or might have been madness. I'm proposing we fold directly into their star. Silence fell across the room. Torres looked confused. Price looked horrified. Monroe's expression was unreadable. Into the star, Hayes repeated slowly. The dimensional fold doesn't just move matter, Webb continued. It creates a temporary tear in the fabric of space-time. If we create that tear at the precise center of a stellar core, the resulting instability will trigger an immediate gravitational collapse, followed by a supernoval level explosion. Everything in the system will be destroyed. The planet, the stations, the fleet, the Emperor himself. And us, Monroe said quietly. Webb paused, then nodded. The plan requires us to execute a second fold at the exact moment of detonation. Using the energy of the explosion to propel us clear of the blast radius, the timing would need to be precise to within 1,000th of a second. Any error, and we die along with everything else. Torres let out a long breath. You're talking about destroying an entire star system, killing hundreds of billions of people. I'm talking about saving 8 billion humans from extinction, Webb replied, her voice hardening. The Empire has made their intentions clear. They will not stop until every last human being is dead. This is not a war we can win through conventional means. This is our only option. The room fell silent again as the weight of what she was proposing settled over them. Hayes looked at each of his officers in turn, reading their faces, gauging their reactions. Price spoke first. The fold drive has never been tested at this scale. We don't know if the ship can survive the transition into a stellar core even for a fraction of a second. I've run the simulations thousands of times, Webb said. The shields should hold long enough for us to complete the sequence. Should, she emphasized. I can't guarantee anything. No one can guarantee anything anymore, Hayes said, rising from his seat. He walked to the viewport and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an Imperial fleet was gathering. Preparing to end humanity once and for all, he thought about Earth. He thought about the billions of people looking up at the sky, wondering if tomorrow would be their last day. He thought about the children who would never grow up, the families who would never see another sunrise, the entire future of his species hanging by the thinnest of threads. Then he turned back to face his officers. Prepare the ship, he said. We leave in 6 hours. No one argued. No one questioned. They simply rose, saluted, and went to their duties. They were soldiers, and they had been given their orders. Whatever doubts they carried, whatever fears haunted them, they would do what needed to be done as the room emptied. Monroe lingered by the door. Captain, she said softly, do you really believe this will work? Hayes met her eyes. I believe it's our only chance, he said, and sometimes that has to be enough. The USS Defiant slipped away from Earth's last hidden shipyard like a ghost fading into shadow. Her stealth systems were the best humanity had ever built, bending light and energy around her hull until she was nearly invisible to sensors. Even so, every person aboard held their breath as they passed through the outer reaches of the solar system, expecting at any moment to see Imperial ships closing in, but the enemy did not come. The Empire was focused on their grand invasion. Gathering their forces for the final assault on Earth, they did not think to look for a single ship running in the opposite direction, Captain. Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge, watching the stars drift past on the view screen. Beside him, Commander Frank Torres studied the navigation charts, plotting their course through the dimensional layers that would carry them to Throne Prime. First fold point in 4 hours, Torres announced. Dr. Webb says the drive is charging normally. Hayes nodded but said nothing. His mind was elsewhere, running through the 1,000 things that could go wrong. The fold drive was experimental technology, barely tested under controlled conditions. Now, they were about to push it further than anyone had ever imagined. Jumping 40,000 light-years in a series of carefully calculated folds, then plunging directly into the heart of a star, the odds of success were small. The odds of survival were even smaller. But Hayes had stopped thinking about odds a long time ago. When you were fighting for your species, you did what needed to be done, regardless of the chances. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Monroe approached from her station at the tactical console. Captain, I've been reviewing the intelligence reports on Throne Prime's defenses. There's something I think you should see. She handed him a data tablet. Hayes scrolled through the information, his expression growing darker with each page. The defensive network around the Imperial capital was even more extensive than they had believed. Automated weapons platforms, early warning sensors, patrol fleets that swept the system every few hours. And at the center of it all, the Div. In light, the Emperor's personal flagship, a vessel nearly 10 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that could tear apart a small moon, even with the fold drive. Getting close to that star is going to be difficult, Monroe said. The moment we appear in the system, they'll know we're there. We'll have maybe 15 minutes before the main fleet can respond. How long do we need to charge the drive for the final fold? Hayes asked. 15 minutes exactly. Aze allowed himself a grim smile. Then we'll just have to keep them busy. He handed the tablet back to Monroe and turned to face the bridge crew. They were good people. All of them. Young and old, men and women, each one had volunteered knowing they might never come home. They deserved to know what they were facing. All hands, this is the captain, Hayes said, activating the ship-wide communication system. In 4 hours, we will make the first fold jump on our journey to Throne Prime. I won't lie to you. The mission ahead is dangerous. Many things could go wrong. But I want you to know that I believe in this ship, and I believe in this crew. Whatever happens, we will face it together. Hayes out. He closed the channel and turned back to the view screen. The stars seemed brighter somehow, more alive. Perhaps it was just his imagination. Perhaps it was the knowledge that he might never see them again. Down in engineering, Chief Engineer Samuel Price was running final checks on the dimensional fold drive. The device occupied the center of the engineering deck, a massive cylinder of exotic metals and pulsing energy fields. Price had helped design it, working alongside Dr. Webb for years to turn her theoretical concepts into working technology. He knew every circuit, every conduit, every potential point of failure. And there were many potential points of failure. Power levels holding steady, his assistant reported. A young woman named Karen Blake, who had joined the crew only 6 months ago. Containment fields are stable, good, Price said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The engineering deck was always warm, but today it felt especially hot. Keep monitoring the energy flow. Any fluctuation, no matter how small, I want to know about it immediately. Walked around the drive, checking readouts and adjusting settings. The device hummed with barely contained power, enough energy to tear apart a normal ship. Only the Defiant's reinforced hull and advanced shielding kept it from destroying them all. Sir, Blake said hesitantly, do you really think this is going to work? Price paused, considering the question. He could lie, tell her that everything would be fine, that they would complete the mission and return home as heroes. But she deserved better than lies. I think we have a chance, he said finally. A real chance. And right now, that's more than we had yesterday. On the observation deck, Dr. Catherine Webb sat alone, staring out at the endless expanse of space. Her mind was filled with numbers and equations. Calculations she had run 1,000 times. Simulations she had tested until she knew every possible outcome. The science was sound. She was certain of that. The dimensional fold drive would work. The stellar destabilization sequence would trigger. The star would explode, destroying everything in the system. What she was less certain about was the escape. The second fold. The one that would carry them away from the explosion required perfect timing. Too early, and the energy wave would not be strong enough to propel them clear. Too late, and they would be consumed by the supernova. The window was measured in thousandths of a second, a margin so small that human reflexes could not possibly react in time. She had programmed the ship's computer to handle the timing automatically. But computers could fail. Programs could glitch. And in that tiny fraction of a second, the fate of the ship and everyone aboard would be decided by forces beyond anyone's control. Webb closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had done everything she could. The rest was up to chance, or fate, or whatever name people chose to give to the unknowable forces that shape the universe. A soft chime announced the approach of another person. She opened her eyes to find Captain Hayes standing beside her. "Mind if I join you?" He asked. "Of course not." He sat down next to her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the stars together, two people carrying the weight of impossible decisions. "When I was a boy," Hayes said eventually, "my father used to take me out to the countryside, away from the city lights. We would lie on our backs in the grass and look up at the stars. He told me that each one was a sun, with planets and moons and maybe even people living around them. I thought it was the most wonderful thing I had ever heard." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "I never imagined I would grow up to destroy one of them." Webb nodded slowly. "I think about that too," she admitted. "The people on Throne Prime, the children who will never understand why their sky suddenly turned to fire. They're not all evil. Most of them are just living their lives the same as anyone else." "Well, their leaders decided to exterminate us," Hayes said. "Their fleets burned our colonies. Their soldiers killed our families. We didn't start this war, Catherine. We're just trying to end it." "I know," Webb said. "That doesn't make it easier." "Oh," Hayes agreed. "It doesn't." The ship hummed around them, carrying them ever closer to their destination. In a few hours, they would make the first fold jump. In a few days, they would either save humanity or die trying. Hayes rose from his seat and placed a hand on Webb's shoulder. "Whatever happens," he said, "what you've accomplished is extraordinary. You've given us a chance when we had none. That matters, Catherine. That matters more than you know." Then he was gone. Leaving Webb alone with her thoughts and the silent stars, the final fold brought them into the heart of enemy territory. One moment, the USS Defiant was floating in empty space at the edge of the galaxy. The next reality twisted around them like paper being crumpled, colors that had no names flooding through the ship, sounds that existed beyond human hearing pressing against their minds. Then, with a thunderous boom that echoed through every deck, they emerged. Captain Daniel Hayes gripped the arms of his command chair as his vision cleared. The view screen showed him exactly what he had expected. And yet the sight still took his breath away. Throne Prime hung before them like a jewel against black velvet. The planet was enormous, at least 3 times the size of Earth. Its surface covered with gleaming cities that stretched from pole to pole. Orbital stations circled it by the dozens, each one larger than any structure humanity had ever built. Ships moved through the traffic lanes in orderly patterns. Thousands of vessels going about their daily business, completely unaware of the doom that had just arrived in their system and beyond the planet. Dominating the sky was the star they had come to destroy. It was a yellow giant, ancient and massive, pouring out light and heat that sustained the entire Imperial civilization. For 10,000 years, that star had burned. In less than an hour, it would be gone. "Fold complete," Commander Torres announced from the navigation station. "All systems operational. We are approximately 50 million kilometers from the primary star." "Begin charging the fold drive immediately," Hayes ordered. "Price, how long until we're ready for the final jump?" Chief Engineer Price's voice came over the intercom, strained but steady. 15 minutes, Captain. Maybe 14 if I push the systems a bit." "Push them," Hayes said. "Monroe, what are we facing?" Lieutenant Commander Lisa Monroe was already working at her tactical console, her fingers dancing across the controls. Multiple contacts throughout the system, patrol ships, cargo vessels, civilian transports. The main defensive fleet is holding position in high orbit around Throne Prime. She paused, studying her readouts more closely. "They haven't detected us yet. Our stealth systems are holding. It won't last," Torres said grimly. "The moment we start moving toward the star, they'll see our engine signatures." Hayes nodded. He had expected as much. "Then let's not give them time to react. Helm, set course for the star. Maximum speed. Monroe, stand ready on weapons." The Defiant surged forward, her massive engines pushing her toward the heart of the system. For a few precious minutes, nothing happened. The Imperial ships continued their patrols, their sensors pointing outward, watching for threats from beyond the system. They never expected an enemy to simply appear in their midst. Then someone noticed. Captain Monroe said sharply, "We're being scanned. Multiple targeting systems are locking onto us."
How long?
Until they can respond. Patrol ships are altering course to intercept. Estimated contact in 12 minutes. The main fleet is beginning to mobilize. They'll be on us in 20. Hayes did the math quickly. 12 minutes until the first ships arrived. 15 minutes until the full drive was ready. They would have to fight. "All hands to battle stations," he announced over the ship-wide channel. "This is not a drill. Prepare for combat." Throughout the Defiant, alarms began to wail. Crew members rushed to their positions, sealing bulkheads and activating defensive systems. In the weapons bays, technicians powered up the massive railguns that lined the ship's flanks. In the medical bay, Dr. Patricia Lane and her team prepared for casualties. Everyone knew their role. Everyone was ready. The first Imperial patrol ships appeared on the view screen, sleek predatory vessels moving to intercept. Monroe tracked them with the ship's targeting systems, waiting for the order to fire. "Hold your fire," Hayes commanded. "Let them come closer. We need to buy time, not win a battle." The patrol ships closed the distance, their weapons charging. Hayes could see them clearly now, elegant designs that spoke of centuries of engineering refinement. The Empire built beautiful ships. They also built deadly ones. The lead patrol ship fired first. A beam of concentrated energy that struck the Defiant shields with a flash of light. The bridge shook slightly, but the shields held. "Return fire," Hayes ordered. "Target their engines. Disable, don't destroy." Monroe unleashed the Defiant's railguns, streams of metal projectiles accelerating to incredible speeds. The first patrol ship took several hits and began to spin out of control, its engines crippled. The others scattered, their formation breaking as they tried to avoid the same fate. "Drive at 40%, Price reported. 10 minutes remaining. More ships were coming now. Hayes could see them on the tactical display, dozens of contacts converging on their position. The Imperial Command had realized something was wrong, and they were responding with overwhelming force. Captain Torres said urgently, "I'm detecting a massive energy signature from Throne Prime orbit. It's the Divine Light. The Emperor's flagship is moving to engage." Hayes turned to look at the display. The Divine Light was enormous, dwarfing everything else in the system. Nearly 10 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, it was the most powerful warship ever built. One shot from its main batteries could destroy the Defiant completely. Time until the Divine Light is in range. 18 minutes. Drive status? 55%? 8 minutes. They were going to make it. Barely, but they were going to make it. The battle intensified around them. More patrol ships arrived, joined now by heavier cruisers and destroyers. The Defiant's shields flared constantly as weapons fire pounded against them. Monroe fought back with everything they had, her tactical skills keeping the worst of the damage at bay. "Shields at 70%, Torres announced. "We're taking hits on the port side." "Reroute power from non-essential systems," Hayes ordered. "Keep those shields up." The star grew larger on the view screen, its surface now visible as a churning sea of fire and plasma. They were deep in the gravity well now, close enough that the temperature readings were climbing despite their shields. The heat pressed against the hull like a physical weight. "Drive at 75%, Price called out. 5 minutes. The Divine Light was closing fast. Hayes could see it now on the view screen, a mountain of metal and weapons bearing down on them. Around it flew hundreds of smaller ships, an entire fleet dedicated to protecting the Emperor's vessel. "They're charging their main weapon," Monroe reported, her voice tight with tension. "If that hits us, our shields won't hold." "How long until they can fire?" 4 minutes. "Drive status?" 80%. 3 minutes. Hayes watched the numbers, calculating the margins. They had perhaps 60 seconds between when the drive was ready and when the Divine Light could fire. 60 seconds to execute the most important maneuver in human history. "Dr. Webb," he said over the intercom, "are you ready?" Webb's voice came back, calm despite everything. "Targeting solution is locked. The moment the drive reaches full charge, we can fold directly into the stellar core. I've programmed the escape. Fold to trigger automatically at the moment of detonation. The timing is precise to within 1,000th of a second. And if something goes wrong, then we won't have time to notice. Hayes almost smiled at that. Webb had a scientist's way of putting things blunt and honest without any attempt at comfort. Drive at 90%, Price announced. 90 seconds. The divine light was so close now that Hayes could see details on its hull. Weapon ports and sensor arrays and the golden crest of the Imperial family emblazoned across its bow. It was beautiful in its own terrible way. A monument to power and conquest, built by an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. In 90 seconds, that empire would begin to fall. Divine light is entering firing range, Monroe said. Their main weapon is fully charged. Drive at 95%. 60 seconds. Hayes gripped his command chair and stared at the view screen. The star blazed before them, impossibly huge, impossibly bright. Behind them, death approached in the form of the most powerful warship ever built. All hands, he said quietly, prepare for dimensional fold. 50 seconds, 40, 30, the divine light fired. Fold now, Hayes shouted, and reality tore apart around them. The dimensional fold was like nothing any of them had ever experienced. Reality shattered into a million fragments, each one showing a different version of the universe. Colors exploded across Captain Daniel Hayes's vision, colors that human eyes were never meant to see. Sounds pressed against his mind, voices whispering in languages that had never existed. Time itself seemed to stretch and bend, seconds becoming hours, becoming seconds again. Then, with a sound like the universe screaming, they emerged. The USS Defiant materialized at the exact center of the star's core, surrounded on all sides by nuclear fire. The temperature outside the hull was beyond measurement, hot enough to vaporize any normal matter instantly. The pressure would have crushed a planet. The radiation would have killed every living thing within 1,000,000 kilometers. But the Defiant was not a normal ship. Her shields, pushed to their absolute limits and beyond, held against the impossible forces. Energy crackled across the hull as systems strained to cope with conditions that no human had ever faced. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Consoles sparked and failed. Crew members cried out in pain and fear, and in the midst of it all, Dr. Catherine Webb worked with a calm that bordered on madness. Core insertion successful, she announced, her fingers flying across her console, initiating stellar destabilization sequence. Hayes could barely see through the chaos around him. The view screen showed nothing but white fire, the heart of a star in all its terrible glory. Beside him, Commander Torres was shouting damage reports that he could barely hear. Somewhere behind him, Monroe was trying to maintain some semblance of control over the tactical systems. "What's happening?" Hayes demanded. Webb's voice cut through the noise, steady and precise. The fold created a tear in space-time at the star's core. The gravitational forces are beginning to shift. In approximately 40 seconds, the star will undergo complete collapse, followed by immediate supernova detonation. 40 seconds. They had 40 seconds to escape or die. "Price," Hayes shouted into the intercom. "Status on the escape fold." Chief Engineer Price's response came through static and interference, his voice strained to the breaking point. "Drive is cycling. 30 seconds to full charge. But Captain, I don't know if we can hold together that long. The shields are failing. Hull temperature is rising. We're taking damage across all decks." Hayes turned to look at his crew. They were terrified. They were exhausted. They were facing death in its most primal form. But not one of them had abandoned their post. Not one of them had given up. "Hold on," he said, his voice carrying across the bridge despite the chaos. "Just hold on a little longer." Outside, the star was dying. Webb watched her instruments with the fascination of a scientist witnessing something unprecedented. The tear in space-time was expanding, disrupting the delicate balance of forces that had kept the star burning for billions of years. Gravity was shifting, pulling the stellar core inward at an accelerating rate. In seconds, millions of years of nuclear fusion would be undone. "Stellar collapse beginning," she announced. 20 seconds to detonation. The ship shuddered violently. A support beam somewhere above them gave way with a shriek of tortured metal. Sparks rained down from damaged conduits. Someone on the bridge screamed as a console exploded in front of them. "Shields at 10%, Torres reported, his voice hoarse. "We're losing hull integrity on multiple decks. Cold drive at 80%, Price called out. 15 seconds. Hayes gripped his chair as another tremor ran through the ship. Through the view screen, he could see the impossible happening. Star was collapsing inward, its surface rushing toward them as gravity pulled everything into the center. Soon, there would be nothing left but a single point of infinite density, and then that point would explode. 10 seconds to detonation, Webb counted down. 9-8. "Full drive at 90%, Price said. "Almost there." 7. 5. Hayes closed his eyes. He thought about Earth. He thought about the billions of people waiting there, hoping against hope that someone would save them. He thought about his crew, 400 souls who had trusted him to lead them into the fire. 4. 3. 2. Full drive charged. Price shouted. 1. Detonation. The star exploded. Webb's hands moved faster than thought, triggering the escape fold at the precise moment the supernova ignited. The ship was caught in the blast wave, picked up like a leaf in a hurricane, and hurled through dimensions that had no names. Energy beyond comprehension flooded through them. More power than humanity had ever harnessed. More force than any vessel had ever survived. The dimensional fold caught that energy and rode it, using the explosion itself to propel them across distances that should have taken years to cross. Space twisted and screamed around them. Time lost all meaning. Reality became a blur of light and sound and sensation. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The Defiant emerged into normal space. Battered and broken, but somehow still intact. The bridge was filled with smoke and the smell of burning electronics. Emergency lights flickered weakly. The hum of the engines had been replaced by an ominous silence. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. They simply existed, stunned by the fact that they were still alive. Hayes opened his eyes and looked around. Torres was slumped over his console, bleeding from a cut on his forehead but still breathing. Monroe had been thrown from her chair, but was already pulling herself back to her feet. Webb sat motionless at her station, staring at her instruments with an expression of disbelief. "Report," Hayes said, his voice barely above a whisper. Torres stirred, wiping blood from his eyes. "We're alive," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it himself. "Ship status, unknown. Multiple systems offline. But we're alive. Where are we?" Webb checked her console, then checked it again. 2,000 light-years from Throne Prime, she said slowly. "The energy wave from the supernova catapulted us completely out of Imperial space. We're in uncharted territory." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They had done it. Against all odds, against every expectation, they had done it. And the star? He asked, already knowing the answer. Webb pulled up the sensor data, displaying it on the main view screen. What they saw was a scene of total devastation. Where once a star had burned, now there was only an expanding sphere of fire and destruction. The supernova was consuming everything in its path, shockwave racing outward at a significant fraction of the speed of light. "Throne Prime is gone," Webb said quietly. "The planet, the orbital stations, the defense fleet, the divine light, everything within the system has been destroyed. Casualties are estimated in the hundreds of billions." Silence fell across the bridge. They had won. They had saved humanity from extinction. But the cost was beyond comprehension. Hayes rose slowly from his chair, his body aching from the trauma of the fold. He walked to the view screen and stared at the distant light of the supernova, a new star born from the death of an old one, somewhere out there. The Galactic Empire was waking up to find its heart had been torn out. Their emperor was dead. Their leadership was gone. Their invincible fleet had been reduced to atoms. Nothing would ever be the same. "Get me a damage report," Hayes said finally, "and plot a course for home. We have a long journey ahead of us." The crew moved slowly, painfully, but they moved. Damage control teams spread throughout the ship, assessing the destruction and beginning repairs. Medical teams tended to the wounded. Engineers worked to bring critical systems back online. The USS Defiant had been built to survive the worst the universe could throw at her. Now she had proven that she could survive even more. Battered, broken, but unbeaten, she began the long journey home. Behind them, the light of the supernova continued to expand, a monument to human determination written across the stars themselves. The USS Defiant limped home through the darkness between stars. The journey took 3 weeks. Each day a struggle against failing systems and dwindling supplies. The full drive had been damaged beyond repair during the escape from the supernova, forcing them to rely on conventional faster-than-light travel. It was slower, but it gave the crew time to recover, time to process what they had done, time to prepare for whatever awaited them. Captain Daniel Hayes spent most of those weeks walking the corridors of his wounded ship, talking to his crew, making sure they knew that their sacrifice had meaning. They had lost 17 people during the mission, good men and women who had given their lives so that billions could live. Hayes memorized every name, every face, every story. He would carry them with him for the rest of his life. When the Defiant finally emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, they found something none of them had expected: a welcoming fleet. Dozens of ships hung in space before them, their hulls gleaming in the light of the distant sun. They were not warships, but civilian vessels. Cargo haulers and passenger liners and private yachts, every spacecraft that humanity had been able to gather. And as the Defiant approached, they began to flash their lights in greeting, a message of welcome and gratitude that needed no words. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Lisa Monroe said, her voice thick with emotion, "we're receiving transmissions from Earth, hundreds of them, thousands." Hayes listened as the messages played across the bridge speakers. Words of thanks and celebration, tears of joy and relief, the sound of a species that had been given back its future. The news of Throne Prime's destruction had reached Earth days ago, carried by faster-than-light communication drones that had witnessed the supernova from a safe distance. The world knew what the Defiant had done. The Imperial Invasion fleet had scattered. Without central command, without leadership, without purpose, the 12 species that had made up the Galactic Empire turned on one another. Ancient rivalries resurfaced. Old hatreds exploded into open conflict. The alliance that had threatened to exterminate humanity was tearing itself apart. Earth was safe. For the first time in 30 years, the skies above humanity's homeworld were free of fear. The Defiant was escorted to Earth orbit with full honors, passing through checkpoints that bowed before her rather than challenging her. When she finally settled into a berth at the orbital station above North America, a crowd of thousands was waiting to greet her crew. Hayes was the last to disembark. He stood at the airlock for a long moment, looking back at the ship that had carried them through fire and death and back again. She was scarred now, her beautiful hull pitted and burned, but she had never looked more magnificent. "Thank you," he said quietly, placing his hand against the bulkhead. "We couldn't have done it without you." The station was chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Politicians pushed forward with speeches prepared. Families of crew members wept with relief. Hayes moved through it all in a daze, shaking hands and accepting embraces. His mind still processing the magnitude of what they had accomplished. He found his senior officers waiting for him in a quiet corner of the station, away from the crowds and cameras. Commander Frank Torres was there, his arm in a sling from an injury sustained during the escape fold. Chief Engineer Samuel Price stood beside him, looking exhausted but proud. Lieutenant Commander Monroe had cleaned herself up for the occasion but still bore the marks of battle on her face, and Dr. Catherine Webb was there too. Standing slightly apart from the others, her eyes distant with thoughts that none of them could share. "Well," Torres said with a tired smile, "we did it." "We did," Hayes agreed. "We actually did." Price clapped him on the shoulder. "The Defiant is going to need a complete overhaul. 6 months minimum before she's spaceworthy again. But the engineers are already fighting over who gets to work on her. She's the most famous ship in human history now." "She deserves to be," Monroe said. "She earned it." Hayes nodded, then turned to Webb. What about you, Doctor? What happens now? Webb was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The dimensional fold technology opens up possibilities we've only begun to explore, she said finally. Not just for weapons, but for transportation, communication, exploration. We could reach other galaxies. We could contact civilizations that no one has ever encountered before. The universe just got a lot bigger. And a lot more dangerous, Torres pointed out. Yes, Webb agreed. But that's always been true. The difference is, now we have a chance to face those dangers on our own terms. The conversation drifted into silence. Around them, the station hummed with activity, the sounds of a civilization that was no longer waiting for death. Through the viewport, Earth turned slowly against the backdrop of space. Blue and green and white, beautiful beyond words, Hayes thought about the people down there. 8 billion souls who had been counting down the days until the end. Children who had grown up expecting to die. Families that had said their final goodbyes. All of them now looking up at the stars with new eyes, seeing not enemies but possibilities. The war was over. Humanity had won. But Hayes knew that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. In the months that followed, the changes came quickly. The fractured remnants of the Galactic Empire sent emissaries to Earth, seeking peace with the species they had once tried to destroy. Some came out of fear, knowing what humanity was capable of. Others came out of respect, recognizing that a species willing to sacrifice so much for survival was not one to be underestimated. New ships were built, designed not for war, but for exploration. Dr. Webb led the team that refined the dimensional fold technology, making it safer and more reliable. Captain Hayes was offered command of the first deep space exploration vessel, a mission that would take him beyond the boundaries of known space, into regions where no human had ever traveled. He accepted without hesitation. On the day the new ship launched, the entire world watched. She was called the Hope, a name chosen by popular vote from millions of submissions. She was smaller than the Defiant, built for speed and endurance rather than combat. But she carried the same spirit of determination that had defined her. Predecessor Hayes stood on the bridge of his new command, surrounded by a crew that included many familiar faces. Monroe was there, serving as his executive officer. Price had insisted on coming along as chief engineer. Even Torres had signed up for the mission, unable to resist the call of the unknown. Webb had stayed behind. Her work was on Earth now, training the next generation of scientists, ensuring that humanity would never again be helpless before the universe. But she had sent a message to Hayes before he left. Just 3 words that said everything that needed to be said. Make us proud. Hayes intended to do exactly that. The Hope departed Earth orbit on a bright morning in late spring, her engines carrying her toward the outer reaches of the solar system and the infinite darkness beyond. Behind her, humanity watched with pride and wonder, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of wonders, mysteries waiting to be discovered, worlds waiting to be explored, civilizations waiting to be met. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through conquest or cruelty, but through courage and sacrifice and an unbreakable will to survive. The Defiant had shown the universe what one ship and 400 determined souls could accomplish. Now, it was time to show them what humanity could build. Captain Daniel Hayes looked out at the stars and smiled. The future was waiting, and he was ready to meet it. The age of survival was over. The age of exploration had begun.